So tonight, I want to welcome our first guest, is Don Pata. Don Pata has been a high school physics teacher for 18 years and a modeling workshop now for the past 6 years. He is a school leadership team member, science department chairperson, and an instructional leader. Don's awards include 2011 PAEMST winner, 2005 MDSTA winner, or Teacher of the Year, and AAPT Physics Master Teacher Leadership Task Force. So please join me in welcoming Don Pata to share his presentation on classroom discourse.
Hi, how you guys doing? You fired up? You don't look nearly as fired up as those afternoon kids. Come on, fire up! Listen, I wouldn't get so excited, but this is fast, so you need to pay attention. You need to really, really focus on this. All right? The idea is that in today's world, right, we are so distracted by everything that goes on around us. To really focus on something, it has to be a choice. Like, you got to get into this, and you got to really look, and you got to really listen. Are you ready? And I'm not kidding. This is fast. So let's do it. I'm here today to talk about classroom discourse. Now, I've been teaching for about 18 years, and for most of that, it's been inquiry-based. You heard some stuff about the modeling methodology earlier today. I am a proponent and an educator, use the modeling method in my classes, and I love it, and I've been doing it for a long time. So that was good. But it wasn't until about 7 years ago that I started introducing classroom discourse into my classroom in a way that was meaningful. And that was the real change. That's what really did it for me. And when I talk about classroom discourse, I mean put the kids, all the kids, in a circle, and they're going to talk to each other about the content. All right? So when I say classroom discourse, that's what I mean. It's the kids in a circle talking to each other about the content. So where are we now? I love this picture, right? Because this picture here represents no classroom ever, right? So you look at it and you're like, yeah, I mean, they're all happy and they seem engaged, and I guarantee there's no learning going on here, right? And when I say learning, what I mean is a permanent change in the cognitive structures that leads to a change in behavior and thinking. That's what I'm talking about learning. It's not about facts. It's about a permanent change in your cognitive structures. And so when you look at this, and you say, well, who's doing all the talking? Well, we all know. We've had lots of classes where we all know who's doing all the talking. We can do better. Why should we talk at all? Aldous Huxley was a big writer about language and novels and stuff. You may have heard of him. And he said that language is learning, that you cannot actually learn without language. If you combine that with Vygotsky's claim that all learning happens in a social construct, then this has the makings of what a real classroom should look like. It's kids looking at each other, talking about the content in a social context. And that's the only way that learning can really happen. So what's stopping us? I think there are three big issues here. The first one is time. We're going to talk a little bit about that. The second one is control. And the third one is fear. These are real impediments to change. And if you're going to change anything about your classroom practice, and when I talk about these things, I frame them from what a teacher would think, right? Because that's what I do. I'm a teacher. So when I think about the classroom, I think about like the teaching. How do you change your classroom? Why would you change your classroom? And what's stopping us? First one is time. I don't know if people that work jobs other than education feel like there's never enough time in their life. I know that every teacher and educator that I know feels like that all the time. I mean, never, right? Have you ever heard a teacher say, man, so much extra time today, I'm fired up. You know, that doesn't happen. So the issue is that we all feel the curriculum dragon breathing down our neck, right? Math teachers more than anybody else. And what this does is it pushes us to cover content. We make decisions that hinge on efficiency rather than learning. And that's an issue, because that's not about students. That's not what's best for them. So when you feel that, right, that is a serious impediment to change. The next one is control. I know a lot of teachers, and I work with a lot of teachers, and control is our huge issue. But it's not because we choose, not like we're control freaks or we're type A's or anything like that. It's because we're conditioned to value control in the classroom, right? I get all of my self-worth from what goes on in my day. When it goes awry, that's when I feel like I didn't do a good job. But that's what I'm conditioned to do. That's why you have to always have a good last hour of the day, right? It doesn't matter what happens in the first 4 or 5 hours. As long as your last hour is the best one, then nothing else matters, because that's how you feel about yourself. But we need to let go of this idea of control. Because control, that's you decision again. That's a decision that hinges on you, not a decision that hinges on the learning of the students. And the last one is this, fear. I don't want to change. Especially because, I have been trying new things. I've been trying to innovate in my classroom, and I've been trying to do new and different things for my entire career. And if I'm successful, why would I change? Why would anybody change? Right? You have to know that there's a better alternative out there. But chances are, it's not for you. It's for the students. We exist in some place called the knowing-doing gap. The knowing-doing gap is this space between what you know you should do and what you are actually doing. Actually, this is where I live my whole life, is in the knowing-doing gap. And when it comes to classroom discourse, I think this gap is bigger than a lot of them. And I'll give you an anecdotal example of the knowing-doing gap. My car mechanic says, listen, you shouldn't let your gas tank run down to empty. I'm like, why not? He's like, because if your gas tank runs down to empty, right, and then the fuel pump doesn't have anything to pump, he said the fuel pump can burn out, and then it's like thousands of dollars. I'm like, wow, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm not going to do that. What did I do on the way here? The empty light came on. Why would I do that? Right? Why am I in the knowing-doing gap? Well, all the research on classroom discourse that's ever been written says that this is the way students learn, by talking to each other. But what do? Right? We still talk at the kids, right? Because we have issues, right? And our issues are control, fear, and time. Those are our issues. So when I say classroom discourse, right, I mean, again, the kids talking to each other. But a lot of talking happens just naturally in the classroom. The idea that there's a teacher up there talking to the kids for 49 minutes, I don't actually think that happens in classrooms. Like, I really don't. I think all teachers try to engage their students in some sort of something. Right? I used to like to do Socratic dialogue, but then I realized it was a dialogue. Die, like a dicicle, means two, right? And so that was me and one student engaging, right? And that was leaving everybody else out. I'm like, I need to do better. So classroom discourse happens as a spectrum. And on one side, we have this thing called the teacher-student IRE. That's initiation, response, evaluation. So I ask a student, say, hey, what are the phases of the moon, Jimmy? And Jimmy's like, here's the phase of the moon. And I'm like, great job. So initiation, response, evaluation. This is garbage. Don't do this, right? We can do so much better with our lives. Because it was one student, and as soon as I put a name on it or I pointed, the rest of the students, boom, they're gone. Like, they're literally gone. And it is so hard to get them back, right? And there was only one answer, which he either knew or he didn't. Right? But it's not like he was like, I don't know. Well, can you think about it? No, he's like, I don't know. He would have answered the answer if he knew. And then I evaluated it with a good job, or I said, well, he doesn't know. Let's go on to somebody else. And I told him he doesn't know anything about science. That's bad. Do something better. Now, on the other end, we have student-to-student CER. That's claim, evidence, reasoning. This is where students are talking to each other. They're asserting their claims. They're providing their evidence. They're saying their reasoning, right? This is amazing. I wish it happened in my classroom. It does not, okay? I'm striving toward that, but there's a lot of stuff in the middle there that we can work toward, but you have to choose to make a change. There's lots of resources out there. So get some resources. Buy a book, all right? Talk to somebody. Do something. Make a change. Here we go. Here's one, 5 practices for orchestrating productive task-based discussions in science. It's awesome. It has 5 steps to do it. You don't have to figure it out on your own. They're going to tell you what to do. So just do it. It's not that hard, right? It freaks you out. And it's going to suck because it's going to be messy. And you're not going to feel in control. And it's going to take way more time. But do it anyway because you know it's good for the students. There's one for math. Right? The only difference is the color. I swear to God, it's like the same book. But it tells you what to do. Then you got this thing. Now, we're having a problem because it's the Talk Science Primer. All right? I know it says primer, but it's not paint, all right? It's the Talk Science Primer. It's how you start to learn to do something. And this gives you prompts. It tells you how to talk to the kids. It says, here's a list of things to say to them to get them to talk to each other and to think deeper. So get it. It's free. It's a PDF. I love it. Why would we even do this at all? Because we do the Common Core. Because the Common Core is good for the students, right? We have this thing called the Standards for Mathematical Practice. These are student behaviors that we're striving for. And this one says, we want students to construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others. How on earth are they going to do this unless they are sitting in a circle talking to each other about the content, right? They're not going to do it if I'm talking to them, right? They're not going to do it if they're doing their problems in their book. This is something they have to do with each other. In science, we have the NGSS, right? We have the science and engineering practices. Again, student behaviors, right? This one says obtain and evaluate and communicate information. How on earth are you going to do that if they are not talking to each other? You have to communicate your information, and then you can do some claim evidence reasoning. So where are we going, right? So if you look at this, if you contrast this with the original picture, who's doing the talking now? Now, I know this is a pipe dream, right? Like, oh my gosh, look at that. That looks amazing. And it does. It is amazing. But you can do it, okay? But you got to take some very specific steps. You ready? You got to change. Okay, you got to take a leap of faith. And I like a good cliff jump. Don't get me wrong, all right? This is a little much for me. But anyway, I'm just saying, this is what it feels like. If you're going to say, like, I'm going to adopt classroom discourse as my main methodology for teaching, that's what it's going to feel like for you. But you can do it because it's good for the kids. But you got to start with culture, all right? If you're going to say to students, I want you to sit in a circle and talk about the content and critique each other's ideas and not your clothing, you have to train them, and you have to have a culture of trust in your classroom that makes some sense, right? I mean, culture is really the only thing in the classroom. I mean, to be honest, I could have done this on classroom culture, and it would have been just as fast. Okay, next one. Throw out the textbooks. They're doing way more harm than good. Way more harm than good. And the reason is it shifts the onus of learning away from the student. If you want your students to learn something, they have to take it on themselves. They have to say, like, this is important to me. I want to learn this. But as soon as you put the answers in a textbook, they become answer seekers and not meaning makers. And that's an issue. The textbooks are hurting our students. You really do have to make it about the students. I mean, you have to. You got to stop making decisions that are better for you and start making decisions that are best for students, even though time control or fear are driving your decision-making paradigm. It's hard. I'm not saying it's easy, right? But I'm saying it's important, and it should be about the students. I'll tell you, though, just a real quick pause. Man, I sound like super teacher when I'm here and the stuff is coming out of my mouth, but when I reflect on my actual practice, it's about halfway, right? It's about halfway to where I want it to be. But that's what I like about this, is because I can come here and I can have real conversation with teachers that are striving to do better. And that, I think, is the most important message that I can take out of today. It's we're all just trying to do better. So checking for understanding, right? This is something that we should be doing in our classroom. There's lots of different ways to do this. You really want to check for understanding? Put the kids in a circle and ask them about what they know and what they don't know. It is terrifying. I think the reason that more teachers don't check for understanding routinely in a really meaningful way, and I'm guilty of this, is because we don't want to know that the students have no idea about what I just taught them. I don't want to know that. I want to pretend that it was crystal clear after it came out of my mouth. I want to pretend that. But you put them in a circle, and you're like, oh, Lord, they know nothing. But then you can do something about that, as opposed to just being in denial. And don't worry about the grades. They're not helping either. If you layer grades on top of a meaningful experience, right, a meaningful learning experience, they impede the learning. Because as soon as you put an extrinsic motivator on an activity you want the students to engage in, then the only thing they're thinking about is that extrinsic motivator. They're not getting anything out of it because they're worried about their grades. And again, they start like, well, is this going to be on the test? How many points is this? All those questions that make no sense in terms of learning. The grades don't help that. In fact, they hinder it. And we got to do better here, people. We got to give up on traditional homework. The idea that your students are at home, at the kitchen table, after dinner, toiling away on their physics and math problems in isolation is a myth. It just doesn't happen. These kids don't live in isolation. They live with each other, continually connected. And homework, because so many teachers give homework and give points for homework, the kids are doing it to get it done, another extrinsic motivator, instead of doing it for any learning. And then if I go over the traditional homework, it shows the kids, I know what I'm doing, but I have no idea whether they know what they're doing or not. I know this is a hard one. Okay, I know this one is hard, but we got to stop teaching how we were taught. Don't try to fool me into thinking you weren't bored in high school. All right? Because I know you were. I also know that there were some things about it that you found valuable because you're now educators. But I bet those weren't the teachers talking at you. I bet those weren't the teachers that gave you hours and hours of traditional homework. It was the teachers that connected with you, that gave you an opportunity to show what you know and do. That's what I think is important. So we got to do better. We can do better for the kids. So what are we going to do? We got to close that knowing-doing gap. We got to. Because it's not about us. It's not about my comfort level. It's about the students. And it's about what we can do for them and how much we can help them grow. All right, that's my time. Thanks so much.